5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So let's talk a little bit about Nathan Diaz and why Mr. Nathan Diaz has been making a little bit of a stink online and on social media here recently, requesting or almost demanding his release from the UFC. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, the implications of that. Let me start by saying, so Nate Diaz is one of the biggest stars in the UFC, much like Conor McGregor is one of those guys. And a lot of people don't understand this, why Conor is such an enigma, why he's this huge star. And a lot of people want to point to, he's lost all these fights. I mean, he hasn't won a fight in this many years. Why is he such a big deal? And just like Conor McGregor, Nate Diaz is another one of those guys who almost supersedes the sport and almost supersedes the UFC. Now, the UFC is what made Conor McGregor. The UFC is what made Nate Diaz. But at this point, they have reached that level of superstardom where they literally have superseded the UFC, and their names, in a lot of ways, have become bigger than the UFC itself. So Nate Diaz has only one fight left on his contract. He's a 36-year-old guy. He hasn't exactly been on a winning streak lately. The opposite of that, he's been on a losing streak. But he is still one of the most sought-after names, and much like Conor, people want to get that Nate fight. People would love to get that Nate fight because it means big money, big dollars. So I want to read what Nate Diaz wrote on Twitter the other night and what it is that we're actually talking about, just in case you have not heard. So it says, Diaz tagged the promotion and UFC president Dana White in his tweet on Saturday. I would like to request to be released from the UFC at Dana White at Hunter. Diaz tweeted, I apologize for asking online, but you don't give me a fight. ASAP, I got shit to do. So this sounds pretty typical of something that Nate would say. Let me just start off by saying that Diaz last fought in June, a unanimous decision loss to Leon Edwards. All right, so let's unpack this a little bit. All right, so Nate Diaz has one fight left on his contract. Now, I want to talk to you guys about the reason why he is pushing so hard to get released by the UFC. All right. And I'm just going to put it right out there. When he says he's ready to get out of the fight game, he means specifically the UFC and probably MMA. Because Nate Diaz has been talking online with Mr. Jake Paul for quite a long time now. And in fact, when all of this and this tweet and everything that Nate Diaz sent out, Jake Paul, of course, chimed right into the mix and is wanting that to happen as well because he wants Nate Diaz to step over into the boxing ring. And Nate Diaz wants to step over into the boxing ring and fight Jake Paul. And let's talk about why that is the case. Nate Diaz, in his last fight against Leon Edwards, and I'm going to read it right here. Trailing the headliners in payouts was Nate Diaz, who took home a disclosed purse of $250,000. $250,000 does not sound like a lot, especially when you start looking at these huge purses of boxing guys and these boxing champions and all that. But considering, that Nate Diaz has a record of, 20-13, I believe. 20-13. Yep. So Nate Diaz has a record of 20-13. So who else do you know that has a record of 20-13, has lost probably their last 3 to 4 fights in a row, and can still make $250,000 to show and $250,000 to win in the UFC? Very few people. As you know, the UFC's pay structure is not set up like boxing. These guys get paid a significant amount less than some of these top name boxers. For Nate Diaz, he's such a big star and people love watching him so much that he is one of those guys that can really put some butts in the seats, and he has a huge following. So the UFC is willing to pay him more. Nate Diaz gets paid more than some of the UFC's champions, and I can guarantee you that. So why is Nate Diaz wanting to get out of his contract so bad? Well, it's because of Jake Paul. And, let's look back. Let me just tell you what Tyron Woodley made. So Jake Paul versus Tyron Woodley 2, and Tyron Woodley made a cool million on that. Tyron Woodley is not nearly as big of a star, okay? Not nearly as big of a star as Nate Diaz. Now, Tyron Woodley has become a bigger star partly because of his two fights with Jake Paul. Tyron Woodley became really well known just by those two fights. I mean, he was pretty well known in the UFC, but his fights with Jake Paul kind of took him to that next level of stardom. Well, Nate Diaz, because of his two fights with Conor and his fight with Jorge Masvidal and, the BMF belt and all this other stuff, Nate Diaz has been propelled into literally superstardom. All right, so Nate Diaz is well past the star level range that Tyron Woodley was when he went to fight Jake Paul. So I'm telling you now, man, that if they put that fight together between Jake Paul and Nate Diaz is going to be looking at, I would say, at the minimum, 2 million. That's minimum. They could probably push it higher than that because Nate Diaz has such a huge following, He's a huge star, man. Huge freaking star. So, and then he made 250,000 in his last fight with Leon Edwards. I mean, this is not rocket science, guys. This is not rocket science. It's very, very clear why Nate Diaz is pushing so hard to get out of this UFC contract. He wants to go ahead and get that last fight over with so that he can be out of his contract and that he can go and pursue a fight with Jake Paul, which is going to make him, I would say, at least a good 8 to 10 times the amount of money that he would make fighting that last fight for the UFC. And, I think there may be a little bit on the part of the UFC with them dragging their feet on this. I think there might be a little bit of intention with that, if I'm being completely honest with you. And that's a whole nother video, so I'm not really going to go into that side of it, why the UFC may be purposely dragging their feet a little bit on that, because they know if they give Nate Diaz that last fight on his contract, he has no intention of re-signing with them. And I think Dana also knows that he has an intention of going and boxing Jake Paul. But the reason we're seeing Diaz act the way he's acting about trying to get out of, hoping that they're just going to let him out of his contract altogether and send him on his way, he's trying to make that money, man. And there's a small window there in the career of Jake Paul for Nate Diaz to jump in there while he's still somewhat in his prime and make this fight with Jake Paul. And, Jake Paul's not going to sit around and wait forever. He's one of those guys that he's going to be looking to stack up another fight here soon. And Nate Diaz does not want to miss that train. And, if he can go in there and fight Jake Paul in a, easy 8-round boxing match, and that's a good fight too, man, because, Nate Diaz throws a lot of punches. And he's a triathlete. So he's a juggernaut. He's a guy that's not going to get tired in there. So I think there is some foreseeable advantages that Nate Diaz would have in a boxing match against Jake Paul. I'm not going to sit here and say he's a better boxer because, Jake Paul has proven to be a pretty solid boxer, especially for a guy who's only been doing it for a few years. So I think he's put the time in, he's put the training in with the top professionals. So I'm not really going to sit here and say that Nate Diaz is a better boxer, but I think he definitely has some notable advantages in that boxing match if they were to do it against Jake Paul. So this is why Nate Diaz is jumping on Twitter and trying to get out of that contract. He would love it if Dana White would just go ahead and let him out so he can go do this boxing match. He knows that window is going to close at some point, and he does not want to miss that train to be able to do that big money boxing fight with Jake Paul, because what they're wanting to do is take some of their younger up and coming talent and use the big name of Nate Diaz to shine them up like a nice new penny, and have this new talent, somebody big like Kamzat or one of those guys to come in and beat Nate Diaz, and then he's going to take the rub of Nate Diaz and he's going to put it on his back, and then he has a long, fruitful career to come in the UFC. So that's the way UFC does things. They're not going to send Nate Diaz out the door with a win over a no-name guy. And besides that, you can't put Nate Diaz in with a no-name guy because Nate Diaz is just too huge of a star. You just can't do it. So there's a lot of reasons that the UFC is looking to put him up against certain people when it comes to his last fight in the UFC. So that's what I got. He wants to go box Jake Paul, guys. It's not what everybody wants to hear, but it's the truth. And can you blame Nate? He's been with the UFC for a long, long time. He's done a lot of fights. He's paid his dues. And I think that Nate is looking at his status at this point, has finally realized what a big star he is and the ability that he really has to make, big money. And I think he knows that he's not going to do it in the UFC, that he needs to get out of the UFC and go do that Jake Paul boxing match. And a couple of fights, with Jake Paul, and Nate Diaz would be able to sit and just comfortably retire. I would do it. Would you do it? I would do it. I'm just saying. I would do it. All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you watching. I will see you next time. Peace.
Can't wait, no time is game, so I just put it all my way. All I need is love, all I need is upside.